everyone, my name is Pineda. I am originally from Colombia, South America, and I will be sharing with you all a presentation entitled, Is it good or bad? A theological approach to Christian thinking and behavior toward politics and issues of public concern. To develop my argument, I will be discussing what's causing division and polarization to be able to promote unity and reconciliation instead. In this presentation, I will use Colombia's history or Colombia's example to analyze what I have called ruling powers. Ruling powers, understanding that as the things that are causing division on a national level, and then reflect on how Christians or any other citizen can go up against them. To be able to accomplish this in my argument, I will first try to identify and define those ruling powers that I have observed through my study of Colombian history throughout the years. Then I will analyze how the church and Christians comes into picture at the moment that political action is required. So to start, I would like to say 5 ruling powers that I have identified as the cause of division and polarization, then to be able to promote unity and reconciliation, responding to those ruling powers. First, ruling power, geography. Second, political parties. Third, religion. 4, cultural agents. And 5, dualism. I will talk about each one in a few minutes. Before I start talking about these ruling powers that cause division according to Colombian context, I would like to invite you all to think about your own context as well. It could be your home country, it could be the place where you are located right now, or any other country or place that comes to your mind while I talk about these ruling powers. We're just exploring Colombia's experience to be able to connect with other places as well. So let's begin. Geography. One ruling power in Colombia is being the disunity. And one of the main reasons that started and caused division in Colombia in its early beginnings as a nation was its geography. La Nueva Granada, which was Colombia's name in that time, had different territories spread in isolated areas among the mountains ranges, making it very difficult to transport and communicate between the regions. Those long distances increased the socioeconomic differences among the territories and intensified regionalism in trading, politics, culture, economics, etc. The government only benefited certain areas of the nation, which also complicated the first tries of political organization after the independence. The different provinces were not capable of getting together to work together. It was the opposite. They started to crack on the inside. Now, let's go to the second ruling power, political parties. These are both connected because due to the geographic division happening in the country, political parties were taking advantage of that in the country. The large-scale competition between political parties created a potentially unstable situation where there was a violence or civil war period when there was time for elections. All of the above show the weakness of the national and patriotic feeling, which turned into a very slow rise of national identity. We might as well think that historically political parties cause chaos among the people. One way of doing so is through polarization and opposition propaganda. They can easily polarize the community with false accusations, fraud, and manipulation, expressing how easy it could be to pull the strings of the non-educated population to cause revolution, political affiliation, fear, or discomfort with the opposite party. It is also possible to say that it has not changed despite the time that has passed. The early political parties' behavior has created a culture of constant polarization and distrust in the government and indifference with issues of public concern that require citizens' participation. All of it increases the national division and confusion about who to trust. It also motivates a constant unhealthy dualism expressed as the good guys and the bad guys, meaning that political parties pointed itself as the only good option for the country, while the opposite party is the very bad option for the country. This directs people toward a thinking of is either or, black or white, and not allowing any spaces in between to take voice. This national disunity and constant dualism between the good ones and the bad ones are a consequence of several factors that also includes the Catholic Church in 19th century. But before we talk about the Catholic Church, let's make a stop right here for a moment and think through some aspects. While we talk about geography and political parties, I think it would be very important to talk about Jesus himself. As we study the Old Testament and the New Testament context on social political issues, we can acknowledge that for years there was an existing regionalism and a deplorable division between Jews and Samaritans. But Jesus' behavior stands against it. Jesus faced political division due to geography and strong political parties through history. In the Gospels, we find different encounters between Jesus and Samaritans. He even used these geographical and historical tensions in his parables to contradict the common acceptance among Jews to regionalism and discrimination against Samaritans. Jesus shows how necessary and godly it is to overcome historic, geographic, and political divisions. He shows that geography shouldn't be a reason to promote division and segregation. Geography division was not accepted in Jesus' approach. Now, division due to political parties or ideologies was not accepted in Jesus' eye either. In fact, when he called his disciples, he chose a diversity of men with different background and political ideology or affiliation. For example, one of them was a zealot, one was a tax collector, and a Pharisee, if we count Paul on it. Now, let's go to our next ruling power, religion. And I would like to approach to this talking about Catholic Church, because Catholic Church, it's been a ruling power in Colombia since its very beginnings. It was fully involved with political education to the elite in the cities, but also in rural areas as political organizers. Catholic Church was in charge of the training in universities to teach how to think politically, philosophically, and theologically. On the other hand, it would consciously promote the manipulation of the lower classes about politics, revolution, economics, and public space. Priests, at the same level as the landowners and other authority figures, were known for the manipulation of votes in parishioners. The Church, Catholic Church, was very radical in supporting certain political parties or candidates according to its own benefits. But at the same time, it also had very strong opposition to other governmental campaigns. There were different clashes when its power was questioned or threatened. As an example, when a German Protestant mission was hired by the president of the moment, whose the Catholic Church didn't approve, to fulfill an education program in some high schools, the division among the nation increased due to the Catholic Church's influence. The conflict ended up in a rebellion in 1876, which constituted the most serious disturbance of public order since the end of the Civil War of 1959 to 1969. The Catholic Church had the power to start a rebellion same or worse than a civil war. It was accomplice with the non-education in politics to the masses and the manipulation to them instead. Unfortunately, it promoted a not healthy voting and political thinking culture that we still see nowadays. First, only a few can truly understand politics. It is not a mass business. Second, the priest needs to tell the people who to vote for, and the people should obey without asking too many questions. Third, if the priest says that we should revolt, we need to revolt, or the opposite. And fourth, if a candidate offers something that is beneficial for me as an individual or for the local community in exchange for my support in its campaign, that is totally legit. Now, even though we are analyzing its influence back in the 19th century, we see how these ideas are still alive among Colombians, both in Catholic churches as in evangelical traditions. Now, we can talk about our fourth ruling power, cultural agents. And this really connects with the church and with the religion because a cultural agent is a social leader who transmits ideals, which means that the church is a cultural agent. These cultural agents can transmit ideas that can trigger significant repairs in the civil fabric or instigate new rounds of social suffering in turn. Cultural agents wave bonds of significance in a society, which means that a cultural agent could be any social leader in a community, a person that has influence in other people thinking and acting. It could be for the good or it could be for the bad. It could increase suffering and pain and polarization, or it could increase hope, peace, and reconciliation. Now, to be able to see a cultural agent's influence, we're going to talk about an example of it in Colombia's situation when the peace treaties were signed in 2016, to be able to analyze a cultural agent influence. In 2012, President Juan Manuel Santos started a peace treaty with FARC-EP, the oldest guerrilla group from the American continent, founded in 1964. There was a referendum where Colombians needed to actively participate in voting for yes or no to the peace treaties. On October 2nd from 2016, Colombians rejected the peace treaties with a 50% of valid votes for no. There was a lot of tension, confusion, and polarization. Now, there were different factors and speeches that contributed to the voting decision among Colombians, but I will address two of them as an example of a cultural agent influence. I will talk about a political leader influence, ex-president Álvaro Uribe, and the evangelical Christian churches. There were two main pieces of propaganda about the reasons why the referendum results turned out like they did. One explanation was pointing out Álvaro Uribe as the main opposition party and his speeches against President Santos as the main reason for Colombians to vote no. In second place, it was said that Christian churches mainly voted for no as well. Even though Álvaro Uribe's speeches were polarized and also many Christians voted for no, it did not affect the result as much as it was shown in the news and in social media. According to Jean Basset in his article Keys to the Rejection of the Referendum for Peace in Colombia, he explains that the result suggests that there was a no vote that goes beyond Uribism, and Uribism meaning Álvaro Uribe's influence, and corresponds to the electorate of many intermediate cities and popular sectors of large cities. His study is based on a territorial analysis of the results in all the cities from Colombia. According to his study, it appears that the populations most affected by the conflict tended to support the treaties, while those who opposed it did not suffer so directly. This raises, in fact, an ethical problem with the very idea of a national plebiscite on this issue, since it would possibly involve a population relatively unaffected by the violence linked to the conflict, rejecting a solution that the most direct victims were willing to support by a majority. Having said this, it is important to qualify the idea that the populations most exposed to violence voted in favor of the agreement, while the no won among populations farther away from the conflict. The massive displacement of populations caused by the conflict greatly limits the possibility of reaching this conclusion. In addition, the results are not so conclusive in favor of the yes in the affected areas. Above all, it would be necessary to take into account a decisive factor that leads to qualify the explanation: participation. I do really hope that at this point you are connecting with what I talked before. This rings a bell about geography as well. Now we find ourselves with an ambiguity. I do, at least. I lived and grew up in Corinto, which is a small village which was and still is very affected by the armed conflict. And while the peace treaties were being accomplished back in 2016, many of the FARC in Corinto started killing social leaders in the community. It was chaotic and the conflict got worse. Nowadays, some FARC dissident groups still rule the area even after 8 years of the treaties being signed. This was our own experience as we faced the conflict, but it doesn't mean that it was the same for different places or geographic zones in Colombia. For some other zones of the country, the treaties were the best solution but for Corinto it wasn't. This means that we cannot generalize the reasons why many Colombians voted yes or no. We need to learn how to read different sides of a conflict. In second place, Christian churches also were tagged as the ones who didn't want the peace, and it isn't entirely true either. But we can approach to its participation and influence as a cultural agent. There wasn't an unanimous decision among Christians. Many churches motivated voting no, and others motivated voting yes. The fact that there have been Christian speeches in favor of yes vote is evidence that there is not such thing as an unique, homogeneous, and unstoppable Christian vote that swept the endorsement of the peace accords. While it is true that in the Christian sector there was a majority of voters against the plebiscite, it is not true that there is not such against the plebiscite. It cannot be affirmed that all the Christian speeches that were issued during that period were in favor of the no campaign. This is also a study on the referendum results. Now, this could be interpreted in different ways. First, it shows division among the Colombian and among Christians as well. Second, we can see that Christians are free to disagree in different manners, and it doesn't mean that the church is failing to accomplish its role. Or three, Christians' decisions are much more affected by the geographic location and political figures' speeches, such as Álvaro Uribe, for example, than it is by neutral and conscious thinking. Even though it is okay to say that there wasn't such a thing as a Christian vote, there is something that has been studied lately in Colombia after the plebiscite: the power of political speeches in churches. Now, as Christians and cultural agents, we are acquiring a reputation for political speech, and it's necessary to learn how we are communicating in this matter. Now, just to finish with a conclusion, we talk about our fifth ruling power, which is dualism, that I have commented before. But all the ruling powers that we have mentioned earlier could either unify or divide. But how can we use them to unify instead of keep promoting division and a stage dualism between the good guys and the bad guys? As we are able to reflect with this example, we are facing ruling powers that are similar to the ones in the 19th century in Colombia. A divided nation, polarization, and perhaps religious manipulation. It is important that as citizens we participate in issues of public concern. Bassett at some point mentioned that participation is a decisive factor when it comes to explaining and exposing the political thinking of the country. As Christians, it is pertinent that we embrace our context, geography, history, trying to build on reconciliation basis to avoid the growing division in our country. Now, how are we going to do that? That's the next question. Thank you so much.